You're looking at a guy who for years, literally for years, I'd come home to my boys and there was never a part of me that wanted to only have the same. I always wanted to be a good dad. I wanted to be a good husband. I didn't think I could. So to come home and look at my boys, to look at my wife and know, I came to know, which is believing a lie, I'll never be able to look them in the eye. I'll never be able to lead them. I'll never be able to have an honest conversation with them without secrets, without shame. At some point, I will just completely lose them. Like I just accepted that. At some point, all 5 of them will at some point probably just want nothing to do with me.
Welcome to Sheila's Take, your go-to podcast for thoughtful insights on love, faith, health, fitness, relationships, and navigating today's challenges through a spiritual perspective. Join me, Sheila Dunbar, as we explore various aspects of life with a mindful and godly approach. Tune in for engaging discussions on all things meaningful and transformative. Welcome back to another episode of Sheila's Take, and today I have a really inspiring guest, Mr. Logan Hufford. Logan is born and raised in Alaska. He's the devoted husband to his gorgeous bride, Carrie, and a loving father to 4 incredible children. However, Logan's journey has been far from easy. For years, he's battled with a crippling sex addiction that almost destroyed his marriage and his life. Today, Logan will share his harrowing yet hopeful journey from the depths of addiction to a life of fulfillment and purpose. Join me as we dive deep into this story of redemption, recovery, and divine intervention. Welcome, Logan. How are you?
Sheila, I'm doing well, and I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. So tell me a little bit about your background. I know your upbringing was in Alaska, right? Alaska.
Yep.
How has that shaped you as a person?
Honestly, I feel like it didn't shape me in the sense that I totally took so much for granted. I took Alaska for granted, like the beauty that is our backyard essentially.
Yeah.
And I can go to the ocean, I can go to the lakes, rivers, forests, like all this. Totally took all that for granted. And that's parallel to I was raised in a really loving, healthy family, relatively speaking, and you baby of 5, both parents were, raised us, like always felt safe and loved. And all of this I totally took for granted. Just again, the beauty of creation that was all around me, the beauty of my family that was all around me. I took all of that for granted for a lot of years, but especially as a kid growing up.
Had family members that just came back from a trip to Alaska. I couldn't go with them this
Okay.
year, but they came back, and I was so bummed that I wasn't able to go because I know Alaska is like a beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah.
That's on my bucket list to get to. I have to get to Alaska to see the beauty of the Northern Lights and all of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we take for granted the beauty of where we are, where we're living, and we don't take it in because, again, we're there, but other people love it.
Right.
So I totally get what you're saying. Now, you're married to Carrie, right? Your
hmm
wife, Carrie. Can you tell us about how you and Carrie met and what kind of drew you together?
Yeah. So we met, so we were 19. This is towards the end of 2009.
Mm.
And
Wow.
we worked together for a relatively short period of time. I'd been doing this job for a while, and I would go on to leave before too long, and she had just started there. But in that
Mhm.
time frame, we crossed over. Um, and that again parallels kind of where we were coming from in terms of our life, in terms of our trajectories. So we both were born and raised in Alaska. We had opposite upbringings. I was
Wow.
raised both parents and a house generally, loving and safe and going to church and, being taught the right things. And she was raised in a home where she's an abuse survivor. She was,
Mhm.
raised in a broken home, a lot of brokenness, a lot of hurt. Was not raised around church or Jesus
So
or the
you were
Bible.
so wait, not to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't really mean to interrupt you, but you were raised in church.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. I just want to bring that point out Okay.
Yeah.
Perfectly. All right.
Yeah. And like, and I always say, I honestly, I think there's never been a day in my life that I didn't believe that God is real, that Jesus died for my sins, that the Bible is real. Like, I've always believed those things, but I also knew my Bible, and it's like, well, the demons believe that too, right? So I would like believe these things, but I didn't have personal ownership of
Relationship. Yeah.
faith, right?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
um, I I prayed the prayer and I got baptized and these kinds of things, but I didn't I didn't have a true relationship with my Savior
You
for
were
a
going
long
through the
time.
motions.
Yeah, it's like, well,
Yeah.
yes, this is what our family does. This is,
Mhm.
and it wasn't like just to be fake. I mean, I did believe in terms of head knowledge, right? But the spiritual, the heart, that was a different matter. But it's yeah, that's the time that Carrie and I met. I just That's always stood out to me as it's such a it was such a crazy intersection because I was coming from this infrastructure that was given to me, I was
Mhm.
born into, a relatively healthy family where I was loved and safe and all these things. And she was raised in the opposite. And she was a new believer. And that was something that was attractive about her, that, oh, she's a Christian. Oh, even in that time, I knew that that was of value. Like, I knew that that was a
Yeah.
good thing, right? But especially as I look back on it, I mean, I was actively seeking unhealthy infrastructure at that time. I was on this prodigal son journey where it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what things can I do? What things can I do that were forbidden, that were unavailable? She, coming from this opposite upbringing, is actively seeking, is trying to build a healthy infrastructure.
Mhm.
So our trajectories were like complete opposite,
Opposite.
but we met kind of
Wow.
at the same point where we had maybe equal amounts of like healthy infrastructure,
Mm.
but she was actively trying to build something and I was actively trying to run away from something.
Wow. Wow. When did you get married?
June 4th, 2011, so a little over
Okay.
13 years ago.
So when did you start realizing that the behaviors were becoming destructive? Did the sexual addiction start before you were married or after?
So that's a phenomenal question because
Yeah.
depending on when you would ask me, I would have given you a completely different answer. And it wasn't not in the sense that I would be purposely trying to lie to you. I didn't realize.
Mhm.
So I mean, my sexual addiction, I I, I don't know, like, you know, okay, there's a day, right? But like I can tell you there were times in my life where I was trapped. There were times in my life where I had become in bondage to I trained my brain to chase after these things, to chase after porn, to chase after new and different and all this. Um, and realistically, I mean, that was as a teenager. Um, it
Wow. Okay.
it hadn't manifested in ways that it would go on to manifest. A big part of that was my own insecurities and, availability and access of certain things. So, like, as a kid, as a young teenager, I was very insecure. I didn't think that girls would like me. I didn't think I
Mhm.
was good looking. And so I wouldn't put myself out there. I wouldn't seek attention from girls for the most part because I was afraid of rejection. So it was porn and masturbation were my
Mhm.
my outlets. And then as an older teen, I started as a young adult, 18, 19 years old. Really, yeah, about the year leading up to before I met Carrie, that's really when I started to kind of exercise these new muscles of really flirting and seeking attention from girls and like serial flirting. I
Mhm.
like seriously, like in the sense of like any girl in my path, any woman in my path, I'm going to see what kind of attention can I get? What kind of response can I get?
Yeah.
And I'm going fishing, right? And it's like and if you reject it or you didn't return it or oh no, I'm just joking around, I'm just goofing around, right? But if I could get something, okay, let me reel that in. Let me take what I can take. Let me see what I can get. And
How
I
far you can go.
right. And I always make a point to really emphasize, um, I'm saying these things pretty matter of factly.
Mhm.
That's not from a place of pride. This is from a place of no. I recognize I was an absolute predator.
Yeah.
I Because what I would go on to become was a husband and a dad who not only, porn and masturbation, flirting, hiring prostitutes, having affair after affair. I mean, it was a complete double life where I felt completely trapped in this because I trained myself to chase after new and
Mhm.
different and all these things. That was a really long way of saying, when did I realize that it was a problem, that it was destructive? I mean, that awareness, that realization came over time. And then, it became more acute over time. I would say I didn't realize that I had a serious problem, even though the word addiction was not part of my vocabulary at that point. That was after marriage. That was
Really?
when, okay, I'm married now and I'm still doing this stuff.
So you were doing this literally while you were engaged and before you got married, and you continued into it while you were married?
That's exactly correct. Um, I don't remember exactly how long, but it was several months before we got married.
Mhm.
That was the first I had a physical sexual affair, with somebody in real life. So, I mean, I don't back down from the fact that porn is infidelity, porn is cheating,
Mhm.
but going even beyond that to
Right.
having sexual contact with another woman, that I had several sexual encounters before I got married. And then, we got married and before I got married, I felt bad. I felt terrible. I hated that I did those things, but I told myself this ridiculous lie that, "Oh, well, at least when I get married, I'll calm down. When I
Mhm.
get married, I'll slow down. I'll stop that. I won't do that crazy stuff."
Mhm.
And, these were muscles that I was exercising. These were skills that I was working on. These were terrible skills, but they were skills that I was working on.
Yeah, yeah.
And they weren't just gonna go away. There was no off button that I could just hit just because I got married.
And it would stop. So when did it start becoming destructive in your marriage?
I mean, probably day one. I mean, I don't literally remember, I don't remember, like, how many days before, once we got married, I don't remember if later that day or later that week, did I masturbate to porn or, was I lusting after I don't remember that necessarily.
Mhm.
But I mean, it was pretty all consuming. I mean, it wasn't every day that I would look at porn. It wasn't every
Yeah.
day that I would have sexual contact with somebody, but every day I was lusting. Every day I was having a pull to I want to look at porn. I want to do these things. It would come and go, but it was like this throbbing, pulsing temptation that never just went away. It
Mm.
might get numbed for a bit, but it would never go away. Not for a
So
lot of years.
when what was the defining moment? Did your wife ever find out, or when she found out, did what moment or event motivated you to seek help and start your journey to recovery?
Yeah. So to that second kind of question, as far as her finding out, I'll
Mhm.
touch on that just real quick for context sake. So when I mention that first year of marriage is when I really started to have some awareness of this is a
Mhm.
serious problem. The reason why that sticks out in my mind is because it had become enough of a shame spot. It had become enough, there was enough guilt that had built up that I actually wrote Carrie a letter and I confessed to the
Wow.
sexual affairs. And that was the first time I confessed to the physical infidelity. She
Mhm.
knew that I had struggled with porn. She knew that. But I didn't tell her anything about having sexual affairs before we got married. I didn't tell her any of that until 6 months after we got married. So by this point, I've had a handful of affairs,
Mhm.
and I wrote her this letter, and in my mind, I thought, I'm never gonna do it again. Like, I feel so bad. This
Yeah.
is so terrible. I'm done. And so it wasn't sometimes I have to be careful that I don't paint like, when I look back at my past, I don't wanna paint everything as this binary, like, I was all evil and it was all, lies, and then everything it's like, no, like, there were parts of me that wanted to do right by my wife. There were
Mhm.
parts
Of
of me that
course,
want
right.
absolutely. I generally speaking, I didn't have a framework of how to do that, and I wasn't doing much to seek a healthy framework at that point. But so I wrote this letter. I thought that I was going to be done,
Mhm.
um, and that it did not lead to repentance. You know, it did not lead to healthy change. It led to, okay, I confessed. I feel better right now. She feels terrible. I feel
Mhm.
better because I've
Yeah.
gotten this off my chest, but nothing in my infrastructure changed. Nothing in my routines changed. I still went to the same place. I worked at a car dealership. Most of the women that I had these affairs with, that I was flirting with, they were generally women that I was selling cars to. And so, you know, I didn't switch jobs. I didn't change companies. I didn't, you know, start doing things differently
Mhm.
in my routine. I just felt bad and hoped that that would be enough. So I
And
had,
because you
so I,
confessed, you felt that that was gonna be yeah.
right. So it's kind of a different version of that whole, like,
Mhm.
before marriage, oh, once I get married, I'll just be able to hit the off button. Oh, just because I feel bad, I'll be able to hit the off button. There was no off button. And so this started this new trend of every time I would have a physical affair, every time I would have sexual contact with a woman, I would confess that.
Wow.
And so it's this arbitrary, I feel bad enough, so I'll confess this. I'm not confessing all the porn. I'm not confessing all the flirting. I would come up with justifications of how I don't need to confess these other things, but I'll confess this stuff. It's like this stupid game that I would play. And keep in mind, so we've got 4 boys. Right now, they're 12, 11, 10, and 8.
Mm.
So this is back, you know, early in our early days of marriage, our first few years. So she was a stay-at-home mom, or is a stay-at-home mom. She is taking care of our babies.
Yeah.
She's cooking dinner. She's changing diapers. You know, she's got her husband coming home with all of this crap, all of these lies, all of this emotional and sexual and psychological abuse that I'm putting on her. She's got no clue how to respond. And
Right.
I know that this is a long way to answer your question, but I felt like I got to put that context out there.
No,
So
that's
so
why
this
I
is
like that. It's
years,
important. Yeah.
and this is going from, you know, from what she knew about the end of 2011 all through 2012, 2013, 2014,
Wow.
affair after affair after affair,
And you
plus
could
all this other
confess
stuff.
and every time you had it, you confessed to her about it.
Right. So probably once or twice a year would I would give her a new confession. Um, and again, all of this other crap that she doesn't know about in terms of this, you know, other sexual infidelity of flirting and porn and stuff.
Mhm.
And keep in mind too, you know, anyone who lives in addiction, anyone who lives in a secrecy and a double life would know this. It wasn't just sexual addiction. I had all kinds of stuff that was wrapped up in this double life. You know, I I would smoke cigarettes when I was at work, but never around her, and I would try to
Mhm.
hide that. I would go out for drinks with my buddies after work and get drunk and drive home drunk. I had a huge sports gambling addiction.
Mm.
You know, the way I drove my car, like everything about my life
Was an addiction.
it was segmented into,
Yeah.
like, there's addict Logan, there's off the rails Logan, and then there's home Logan, who's not healthy. He feels bad about all this stuff over
Mhm.
here. He wants to be a good dad. He wants to be a good husband, doesn't have a clue how. And eventually it got to the point where I'm like, I won't be able to be. I won't be
Yeah.
able to look my kids in
Yeah.
the eye, look my wife in the eye.
Yeah.
So you asked, what was that defining moment? What was that breaking point? And most of my story, most of Carrie's story, most of our story is a series of, like, progression, and it's not necessarily, you know, okay, on this day, things were different. On this moment, things were different.
Mhm.
Well, with this, there was a day. There was a moment where things started to shift. There still was no off button, but, uh, at the end of July, I had another affair, and this was a different kind of affair. This was a month-long affair where it was physical and it was emotional, and it was something where Carrie would tell you, she shares this in her testimony, it was the most painful affair that I ever had,
Mm.
which is a heck of a thing to hear from her, right? From the wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I confessed this one to her, she had enough, and she did something she'd never done before. She gave me an ultimatum. She said, okay, if you don't get some serious help, then I'm gone. You're going to lose me and you're going to lose the boys. And I believed her.
Mhm.
And so that was, you know, the summer of 2015. Well, my sobriety date from sexual addiction, from pornography and masturbation and, you know, sexual contact with other women, my sobriety date's May 19th, 2016. So there's almost a year
Mhm.
of ultimatum. And then I started getting some real traction. So when I say there's no off button, I meant that. But what that did was that spurred me to try to do things differently.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer in like the words I use matter. My verbiage is really important, right? When I say I started to try to do things differently, that's super weak verbiage, but it is accurate
Mhm.
because I didn't jump in, guns blazing, ready to do whatever make whatever sacrifices. No, I went in with excuses and a lot of denial and a lot of hopelessness and a lot of half-hearted, okay, I'll kind of dip my toe in. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so, when I share this part of my story, I always emphasize like this is not all of this is prescriptive. A lot of it's not, but it's all descriptive, right? This is how it went. But what happened in that was I was, even if I was doing it very imperfectly, I was seeking healthy resources, and God honored that. I mean, God started
Mhm.
flooding my life with people and resources, and eventually hope. I went to multiple groups before I found the group that had a program that was this was the thing that I needed. This was
Yeah.
the life absolutely like life-changing, earth-shaking group. And that's not an exaggeration. I can go into what that looked like. And this man, Rick, who I thank God every day for a few things, and he's one of them. Because this man, Rick, was absolutely God's hands and feet in my life, in my family's life.
Mhm.
And he, I think about this part of the story, like that first part of the story is like this hell on earth, right? It's like this horror
Mhm.
show. And then when I get to this part of the story, it still isn't just like perfect and golden, but it's God is now putting a series of landmarks in our life, in our story. And that first landmark that I see is Carrie stood up to her abuser and said, I can't control if you hurt me, but I can control how I respond to you.
Exactly.
And that was one landmark. So now she's doing things differently, even though she's just barely learning how to be healthy, but she's trying to,
Mhm.
respond in a healthy way. So that was a landmark. Then Rick was a landmark. Rick made it very clear from the get-go, this isn't Logan's show. We're not going to do things Logan's way. One of the first things I asked him, and I thought I was doing something real good. I was like, hey, uh, because we met at a Celebrate Recovery, so it's a mixed group, it's different addictions and different
Mhm.
substances, and he and I were the only guys that said, "I'm here for sexual addiction." He's an older guy, he's my dad's age,
Mhm.
and he pulled me aside after, and he's like, "Hey, I'm glad you're here, but you need more than this group. You need something more intense." And at some point after that, I don't know if it was, a few days later, a couple weeks later, I was talking to him and I was like, "Hey, I do wanna do more. Could we get together for coffee every now and again and talk about this stuff?" And in my head, I'm like really putting myself out there. I'm really trying something. And Vic is one of the most loving men that I know. He is like a dad to me. He
Mhm.
is my best friend outside of Carrie. And Rick looked at me dead in the eyes and he goes, "Logan, if you want to get together for coffee and talk about this, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for you." And he quickly followed up. He's like, "If you want to seriously work on this, I will walk with you and we will work on this. But it's not going to be just getting together for a coffee every now and again. It's
Yeah.
going to be hard work and you're not going to control it." And so he ended up walking me through a mentorship program that was 2 years of essentially voluntary house arrest. It's a Christ centered 12-step recovery program, built on three pillars, it's centered around a relationship with Christ. That
Mhm.
all the change in the world is only gonna make some earthly behavioral change. Unless it's built around my relationship with my savior, my creator, it's not gonna
Mhm.
bring true healing. So it's built around that. It's built around practical change, not just trying better, thinking positive thought, but what physical, tangible things am I doing differently? And then the third part is, diving deep into the science of how does addiction work and how
Right.
does my brain function and
Mhm.
how can I rewrite those neural pathways and that kind of thing. And it but that is what it took. There was no off button, but that's not the same thing as that there was no way out of the cave. There
Right.
absolutely was a way out of the cave.
There was so much, and I'm listening
Yes,
to
I'm
why
so
you told me. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, how is Carrie through all of this? Because,
yes.
like, I'm gonna be honest with you, Logan, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. But if it's continual through the years, I that would be hard. That would be hard for a woman
Yeah.
to take. And the fact that you're confessing it to her, even though you're being honest, that even has to hurt her must have hurt her even more. How did you and Carrie work together to rebuild the trust and intimacy in your marriage? How did you do that?
Absolutely. So a couple things I just want to state to be very, very clear on this. So number one, just like I was sharing with like my initial approach to recovery,
Mhm.
I'm describing the story of what happened. I'm not necessarily saying this is all healthy and this is exactly what you
Right.
should do.
Oh, no,
And the same
definitely.
thing with her. Um, you know, she absolutely had every right to leave me
Yeah.
because of the sexual infidelity, and that would not have been a wrong thing. Um, so I always make sure to like, yeah, she stayed with me. She chose to stay.
Mhm.
That's not the same thing as she responded in a healthy way. Like,
Yeah.
I'm glad that she stayed, and obviously, I'm glad that now we are both in recovery and she's working through her sexual betrayal trauma healing, and but, you know, it's not like when we work with couples that we tell them, "Hey, no matter what he does, you just stick with him." No, if he's
Yeah. Yeah.
unrepentant, if he's not willing to change, if he's not, then, we don't want to see people get divorced,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but we don't encourage a wife to stay and continually get sexually abused if if she if she is feeling trapped and he is unrepentant, then we don't counsel for that. But yeah, it's like in her story, sometimes people will say if she'll share her testimony, and people hear her story, and people will sometimes say, and they mean it as an encouragement, they mean it out of love, but they'll say something like, "Man, it's so incredible that you stayed with Logan," and that can actually be really hurtful to her
Mhm.
because we try to emphasize like the incredible thing isn't that she stayed. The incredible thing is that she stood up to her abuser.
Mhm. Right.
And that's what needs to be emphasized.
Yeah.
Even though, again, like obviously, I'm incredibly grateful, and I
Mhm.
literally, it consumes me every single day, my gratitude for the fact that I do have Carrie in my life. But I'm fully aware that I don't deserve it based on my previous actions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, her story, I just want to say thank you for giving me a platform to even share her part of the story, because I don't ever want to speak for someone else, right? That's not my
Right.
place here.
Mhm.
Everything I'll share from her end is straight from her mouth. These are things that she would openly tell you when she shares her story, her testimony. She's just at this point in time, she's not going on podcasts, but so Carrie got into sexual betrayal trauma healing right after I got into recovery.
Okay.
So in
Mhm.
July of 2016, she started attending a group that was led by Patty, my mentor Rick, his wife Patty led this group.
Okay. Yeah.
And so she mentored women through sexual betrayal trauma healing, recognizing, you know, yeah, your husband didn't do these things because you weren't enough. He didn't do these things because you didn't give XYZ.
Mhm.
He did these things because he did these things because he chased after this stuff, because it had nothing to do with you being enough or being sexy enough or
Right.
giving, and had nothing to do with that. um, what can a woman control and what can't she control? What healing tools does she have available to her? What does she need to do to be safe? What does she need to do to take care of herself? And when you talk about trust, that is an essential part of it. Carrie was taught from a very early stage in recovery, and she instills in women now, because now she leads the sexual betrayal trauma group. Because our mentors have moved away a couple years ago. That, when we're dealing with this kind of stuff, when we're dealing with addiction, there's one thing you can trust from your addict spouse. You can trust their behavior
Mhm.
over an extended period of time. It doesn't mean that every word is a lie, right? But you can't trust their words at this point. But you
Yeah.
can trust what they're doing over the course of an extended period of time. And so, Carrie absolutely, she jumped full on into recovery. She did a much better job than I did of like, just she jumped in and embraced it. She made a promise to herself that I didn't hear about until a couple years later,
Hmm.
that that once she started attending, she would attend every week unless, there's sickness or something. And she has for 8 years, and every time she attends, she will share. She'll share how she's feeling, no matter
Mhm.
how hurt
Wow.
she is, no matter
Wow.
how much she's feeling triggered, no matter, she will always share what's on her heart. And God has honored that so much. I mean, she has jumped into this, and the ways that we are able to experience life together, I I can't. I mean, I try to put it into words. I can't put it into words that do any bit of justice. The Because like I always say, God didn't fix our marriage. God didn't keep us together. God didn't let our marriage survive. God like tore our marriage down in the best of ways and then rebuilt it.
Real be
We
right, I
didn't
was
we
gonna
didn't
say that,
get
yeah.
we didn't get divorced.
Mm,
We didn't, that's a part of some people's story, right? But we stayed together. We never physically separated, but we don't do things the same way. We don't communicate the same way. We don't have the same dance, as my mentor and his wife would always
mhm,
say. We dance a new dance for the last 8+ years. And so, she has absolutely learned to trust, and trust has been able to be built, but it has nothing to do with like rebuilding and getting back to the way things used to be, because the way things used to be was terrible, right?
yeah, yeah, I
And so
understand.
it's this beautiful new creation that God has
Mhm.
given us.
What advice would you give other couples who are facing those similar challenges?
So since you say couples, I mean, I guess I'll share a couple pieces, kind of to a man and to a woman.
Mhm,
Um, I mean, to the man, I would say there is. I mean, I guess technically this applies to anyone, man or woman, addict or family of an addict. There is nothing that I can go through. There is nothing that I can experience. There's no struggle that I can have that healing does not exist for. And I realize that that's a ridiculously strong statement, but God has way more than just my story. God has flooded my life with so many people with so many different addictions, so many different traumatic experiences, incredible abuse and hurt that they have
mm,
experienced, and God has provided healing. There is nothing that I can experience that God does not provide healing for. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be natural consequences,
right,
right? On both sides of things, in terms of, I if somebody's been traumatized, there's going to be some natural consequences they're going to have to work through. It's not their fault. It's not fair, right? If I'm an addict and I did certain things, some of the people I know, there's one guy that he went to prison because of where he went in his addiction. The
wow,
natural
wow,
consequences,
yeah,
but there's still healing. There's still healing available. But I mean, to a man that's struggling with addiction, there there's nothing that you have done that makes you the outlier. Like, it's not to excuse it, but I promise you, there are other people that have made those same terrible decisions that have experienced healing from it. It's up to you whether or not you are willing to embrace and seek out the healing. And, to a woman, I guess, if a woman is going through this or has gone through this, to please seek out that healing. Is I won't spend much time on this, because just for, in terms of this has come across, but better coming from Carrie or someone in her shoes. But we see this all the time, that you know a couple starts coming, or the man starts coming, and his wife, because it's not her fault, because she shouldn't, it's not fair for her to have to spend hours a week coming to meetings and doing homework. It's not
right,
fair that she should have to spend her energy and her time working on things that she did not cause. And it's like, all of that is true. It's not fair. It's not her fault. But at the end of the day, and Carrie would say this, you know, Carrie was wounded. If somebody stabbed her and left her, on the street next to the hospital, she could say, okay, I didn't cause this. I didn't, choose to get stabbed. Why am
right,
I going to go to the hospital? Or,
exactly,
or
yeah,
she can go to the hospital. It has nothing to do with fairness. It's about, there's a wound, there is a trauma there. And so if we see it so much, and it is heartbreaking when a woman has been hurt in that way and doesn't seek healing. And it doesn't have to be with Carrie's specific group, but there's sexual addiction therapists, there's sexual betrayal trauma therapists, there's all kinds of healing that is available, and not all of it's created equal. But
yeah,
there are resources. But if a woman doesn't seek that out, there tends to be this thing that happens where she becomes frozen in time. and she
Mm,
is forever the victim. She's forever the betrayed spouse.
yeah.
And it's like, it's this, it just cements all of this hurt and this
Yeah.
resentment. And it's a really, really sad thing. And then of course that affects her, that affects kids, that affects family. It's this whole thing. So which again just, circles back to healing is available. It's not gonna be easy, but it is available.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It takes time. Hopes and dreams for the future, both for you and for your family and your recovery work. What's happening there?
Well, the two things that come to mind, I mean, in terms of recovery, honestly, this is part of it. I've
Hmm.
been really focused. I've never left recovery last 8+ years. And it may change in terms of exactly how my involvement looks in the but I mean, I'm never going to have accountability leave my life. That's for
Hmm.
sure. But I've been locally giving back. So when our mentors left, I now lead the men, and she now leads the spouses group, and that's been the focus for 8 years. And then this year, I started really trying to reach folks on a broader level through Instagram and doing
Hmm.
podcasts. And so, I mean, that's been amazing seeing how uh, God has opened those doors, and connecting with people both like this to shout from people's
Hmm.
rooftops, hey, this is available. And
Yeah.
and then and then people reaching out, I mean, the first two people that reached out to me, I'm in Alaska, um, guy from Florida and a guy from the UK that both had similar stories to myself, and had those same feelings of that I'm alone, I'm the only one. And it's like, I'm here in Alaska, you're down in Florida, you're over here in London, and all three of us have had these same feelings that I'm the only
Yeah.
one, right? So this is a big mission, of just reaching folks in whatever way I can. Not that I'm gonna personally mentor everyone that
Hmm.
follows me on Instagram, but I can be a resource, right? Because
Right.
it's not a competition. We need to gather up as many resources as we can. And then as a family, as a couple, uh, I mean, to be quite frank, I mean, the biggest area of focus for me and Carrie right now is we got those 4 young men. We got those
Yeah.
4 boys.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, praying constantly, for discernment and for wisdom, for peace, to mold them, to be men who love God, who love each other, who love others. Um, and and we have conversations with them about life. They all know our story. They know
Yeah.
what God has delivered us from, and to some level, they know what it took to get there.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that hopefully there's never a day where they turn a certain age and they're like, "Oh, wait, what? This happened? What? You did this?" Like,
Hmm.
no, like you're going to know your parents are not perfect, but you're also going to know your parents have worked their butts off, and that God has brought a lot of healing, a lot of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you grateful for?
I'm going to tell you what I pray every single night, which is, thank you, God, for salvation. Thank you for recovery. Thank you for, I say mama because I'm praying with my boys. Thank you for mama, and thank you for Elijah, Darius, Stephen, and Isaiah. Because, and I mean, I rattle that off because I pray that every single night. I don't rattle it off because it's not incredibly dear to my heart. I mean, Sheila, you're looking at a guy who, for years, literally for years, I'd come home to my boys, and there was never a part of me that wanted to only have the same. I always wanted to be a good dad. I wanted to be a good
Yeah.
husband. I
Yeah.
didn't think I could. So to come home and look at my boys, to look at my wife and know, I came to know, which is believing a lie. I'll never be able to look them in the eye. I'll never be able to lead them. I'll never be able to have an honest conversation with them without secrets, without shame. At some point, I will just completely lose them. Like, I just accepted that. At some point, all 5 of them will at some point probably just want nothing to do with me. Like that's the logical outcome. That's what I just accepted. So God bringing recovery into my life, bringing people like Rick into my life, I thank God for that every day. And in a healthy way, I remember, what the old days were like. Not in the sense of I don't dwell in my past, I don't
Mm-hmm.
dwell in shame,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I definitely don't glorify it, but I remember the darkness just enough to keep me grounded and to keep me motivated because I don't ever
Mm-hmm.
want to let those old things back. I don't
Right.
ever want to let sin take that foothold.
Mm-hmm. When you let go of negative and sin and things like that, you got to fill yourself up with positive. You got to fill up with something.
Yep,
Otherwise,
yep.
it's going to come back. I truly believe that. Any final words? Any final thoughts?
I'll just throw this out there, but I mean, if folks, because this really is become a big mission of mine this year. If folks want to get in contact with me or
Hmm.
want to, hear more about our story and also specific tools, I that's what my Instagram is all about. It's not a personal Instagram as far as like catching up on family. It's all about sexual addiction, of awareness, recovery tools, practical stuff that people can learn that they can apply. And I would say even if somebody doesn't have a sexual addiction, I mean,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's destructive tendencies, how to work on them, right, and how to be healthy, as well as the betrayal trauma aspect. But my handle is no longer in bondage. Periods in between the words.
No
Um,
longer, no period, longer period, and bondage period.
yeah. So
Okay.
for 7.5 years, when I would, I'd attend recovery groups, leading my groups, I would say I'm Logan and I'm a recovering sex addict. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that because identities and labels, they absolutely matter. And there is a point in life, I think, where if I'm an addict, if I have an addiction, if I'm trapped, I need to identify the problem. I need to
Hmm.
identify the stakes. And so saying I'm a recovering sex addict, like I think that was accurate. But I felt this really strong conviction over the past now, maybe like 8 months, to just look at that and analyze that and go, is that accurate? Is it accurate to say I'm a recovering sex addict, or is there a more accurate term? And this wasn't something that I was like intellectually, it was more, it was a heart conviction.
Hmm.
And so about 8, 9 months ago, I said, no, my identity is I'm no longer in bondage to sexual addiction. It still identifies the problem, which was sexual addiction, but I don't need to go back to that. I could, if I wanted to, I could go back to those shackles, but they're
Yeah.
off of me. I'm not
Yeah.
trapped in it,
Mhm.
not being trapped in that cave. That is so crucial. And so that's, when I started with Instagram, like, yep, I know, I know what it needs to be, which is no longer in bondage because
No
that's the
longer.
accurate description.
Okay, so that's your Instagram. No dot
Yeah.
longer dot in bondage.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the only way they can connect with you, or
That is very much the best way.
okay.
If you don't have an Instagram, I mean, I guess the two things would be, they could reach out to you and you. I don't
Mhm.
mind if you pass along my email. The other way, it just, if somebody doesn't have an Instagram, they want to get a hold, um, prodigals of Alaska.com. It's not my personal website.
Mhm.
It's the website for the prodigals groups. There's two up here, one in Wasilla, where I live, and then there's one in
Mhm.
Anchorage, Alaska.
Okay.
And my contact info is on there as well. So if you just want to ask me a question, you can utilize that website as well. But if you have an Instagram, that's by far the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Well, Logan, I appreciate you, through your steadfast faith in Jesus Christ and a committed recovery. You have emerged from your sexual addiction, you achieving freedom that you once thought was impossible. You are now happily married and rejuvenated. You're dedicating your life to sharing this incredible story, and you're aiming to inspire others and guiding them on. I just appreciate you so much, and I thank you for being on my podcast.
Well, I mean this in all sincerity. Thank you so much because giving me the platform, again, giving me that rooftop to shout from it. I don't take it lightly. I appreciate it very much.
You're
Thank you.
very, very welcome. If you want to reach out to Logan, again, his Instagram is no dot longer dot in bondage. Please reach out to him. He'll get back to you. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to Sheila's Take, leave a review, and share this episode with anyone who needs a dose of inspiration. I thank you for tuning in, Until next time, stay curious and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Thank you. Until next time, remember to embrace the journey, build lasting connections, and step boldly into all that life has in store for you. I'm your host, Sheila Dunbar. Blessings to you.